There are moments when the heart suddenly grows completely quiet. These are the moments that remind us how deeply we feel, even when we do not say a single word. We have all tasted disappointment. We gave with pure sincerity, but we received far less than we hoped for. We waited for understanding, but we met nothing but silence instead. And yes, it hurts deeply. But this pain carries incredible wisdom. It gently reminds us that the human heart was never meant to rest on people. Its true rest is only with Allah, the one who never leaves us waiting. Disappointment is not a flaw in your character. It is absolute clarity. It is a reminder that Allah is showing you a reality that you could not see on your own. Pain does not come into your life to break you. It comes to wake you up. It pulls the heart toward deep reflection, toward patience, and toward true trust. The Prophet Muhammad taught us that real strength is not found in hiding your emotions. Real strength is found in turning those emotions toward Allah with honesty, with humility, and with hope. People change. Circumstances shift. Life moves in directions we never planned, but Allah remains completely constant. When the heart leans entirely on Him, even the heaviest moments begin to soften. If your heart has ever felt completely alone, remember this: Allah was closest to you in that exact moment. He saw your quiet struggle. He heard the thoughts you could not express out loud. He was guiding you through every single silence. This is exactly where your healing begins, with awareness, with softness, and with the absolute certainty that Allah never allows a heart to break without preparing it to rise again, clearer, calmer, and much closer to Him. There comes a moment after disappointment when the heart finally begins to see. It does not see with the eyes, but with a much deeper awareness. The veil slowly lifts, and you realize that every single emotion you felt had a specific purpose. Nothing was random. Nothing was wasted. Allah was teaching you, even through the ache. Sometimes the very first thing we notice is how quickly our expectations rise. We give with true sincerity, and we naturally expect sincerity in return. We show deep loyalty, and we hope for that same loyalty back. But the truth is, not every heart carries the same depth. Not every soul understands the true weight of trust, and not every person knows how to handle what we offer with care. This realization is painful, but it is completely necessary. The moment you begin to understand this, your heart naturally softens. It stops demanding perfection from people who are imperfect by their very nature. It stops expecting emotional clarity from those who are still confused within themselves. And slowly, gently, you begin to breathe again. You start to see that Allah allows disappointment to protect you from attaching too tightly to things that cannot support you. He redirects your heart so it does not break in much deeper ways later on. What felt like rejection was sometimes absolute protection. What felt like a painful loss was often a shift towards something much better aligned with your soul. This is exactly where real emotional maturity begins. You learn that not every relationship needs the same level of access to your life. Some people are meant for closeness, others are meant for distance, and some are meant only as brief stops along your journey. This is not harshness. This is wisdom. This is balance. This is the clarity that comes when Allah expands your understanding. In this chapter of your heart's journey, you begin to notice patterns. You see who gives and who only takes. You see who truly listens and who simply waits for their turn to speak. You see who stands by your side and who stands near you only when it benefits them. These observations are not meant to make your heart hard. They are meant to guide your kindness. They help you place people exactly where they belong, with fairness, without any illusions. With each new layer of clarity, your heart becomes lighter. You stop trying to force people into roles they were never meant to play. You stop taking every change personally. You stop measuring your worth through the behavior of others. Your true value comes from Allah, not from someone's temporary attention. It is in these quiet understandings that healing begins. It does not happen loudly or suddenly, but gently, like the dawn after a long night. You begin to trust that Allah knows exactly what your heart needs, even when you struggle to understand it yourself. Slowly, you learn to walk with a new kind of awareness, soft, balanced, and deeply grounded in faith. Because the heart that sees clearly is not a heart that never hurts. It is a heart that learns, adjusts, and rises with Allah, guiding every single step. There comes a point in every emotional journey when the heart begins to ask itself honest questions, not to judge, but to truly understand. When disappointment strikes, the mind often goes quiet, but the heart becomes loud. In that loudness, you begin to see what was once hidden. You start noticing how easily we raise our expectations and how naturally we assume that others feel what we feel or think as deeply as we think. Yet, every person carries a completely different story. Some hearts are trained by life to be extremely cautious. Others are shaped to be completely open. And some simply do not know how to meet the depth you offer, not because they are bad people, but because they have not grown in the same way. This realization can sting at first, but it also brings a new kind of clarity. You begin to understand that disappointment is not always about someone intentionally hurting you. Sometimes it is simply about discovering the limits of their emotional capacity. And once you understand someone's capacity, you stop expecting from them what they cannot give. This is where you must practice gentleness with yourself. You may look back and wonder, why didn't I see the signs? Why did I give so much? Why did I trust so deeply? But the truth is very simple. You gave because you are sincere. You trusted because your heart is clean. And you hoped because Allah created you with compassion, not suspicion. Your heart needs kindness at this stage. It needs reassurance, not blame. The Prophet Muhammad taught us that the believer is gentle, even with their own soul. He warned us that being harsh with ourselves creates spiritual exhaustion. So let your heart breathe. Let it understand without punishment. Let it reflect without tearing itself apart. Reflection is not about digging for your mistakes. It is about noticing patterns. For example, you may recall moments where you gave more time than you actually had, simply to keep a relationship balanced. You may think about situations where you stayed completely silent just to maintain peace, or times when you carried an emotional weight that should never have been yours to hold. These realizations are not meant to break you. They are meant to teach you where your boundaries were too soft and where your heart was too open. With every realization, your heart matures. It learns balance. It learns awareness. It learns that not everyone deserves the same level of access to you. You begin to see that people come into your life for different reasons. Some come to support you, some to teach you, some to test you, and some simply to remind you that only Allah can be your true refuge. When this understanding settles gently inside your chest, something beautiful happens. Your heart becomes calmer. Your expectations become wiser. And your trust begins shifting away from people and toward the one who never disappoints. This is growth. This is clarity. This is the beginning of emotional strength rooted completely in faith. There comes a stage when the sharp shock of disappointment begins to fade, and what remains is a slow, steady sadness. It is not the kind of sadness that overwhelms you all at once. It is much quieter than that. It settles gently into the heart, reminding you of what mattered and why it hurt in the first place. This sadness is not a sign of weakness. It is simply the heart processing a reality it did not expect. When trust breaks, something inside us needs time to understand what changed. You begin to recognize that the pain is not only about the person who let you down, it is also about the version of yourself you were around them, the hopes you carried, the meaning you attached, and the pure sincerity you offered. Losing that feels like losing a piece of your inner world. At this stage, the believer often turns inward. You start revisiting memories, not to hold on to them, but to truly understand them. You recall the moments when their words comforted you, and the moments when their silence confused you. You think about the kindness you offered, and the times you stayed quiet just to keep the peace. These reflections can be difficult, but they are completely necessary. They help you see the full picture without any illusions. This is also the stage where the heart can easily slip into self-doubt. You may ask yourself, was I too open? Did I care too much? Did I expect too much? But pause right here. These questions are a natural part of healing, not a sign that you did something wrong. You cared because your heart is alive. You opened up because sincerity is part of your core nature. You hoped because Allah created human beings to desire connection. The believer must remember that sadness is not a punishment. It is a cleansing process, a way for the heart to release what it can no longer carry. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ cried for his losses. He felt deep grief and he felt hurt. He taught us that expressing our honest emotions does not weaken our faith, it strengthens it, because it brings the heart back to Allah with total honesty and humility. During this time, your heart may feel heavier than usual. You might speak less, think more, or prefer silence over conversation. That is completely all right. Healing requires space. The heart needs room to breathe, room to release, and room to reorganize its emotions. This sadness is part of that reorganization. It is the heart discovering what truly matters and what is better left behind. As you move through this phase, you will begin to notice something subtle. The sadness becomes softer. It changes shape. It stops pulling you down and starts teaching you gently. You realize that the things you lost were never meant to stay. You understand that Allah removed what your heart could not release on its own. And you begin to trust that this sadness is temporary, but its lesson is lasting. Eventually, the heart recognizes a powerful truth. You did not break, you grew. You did not fail, you learned. You did not lose, you were guided. Slowly, as this wisdom settles deep within, the sadness begins to turn into clarity. And that clarity becomes your next great step toward true healing. There comes a moment in healing when the heart begins to look inward gently, honestly, and without fear. This moment is incredibly important. It is the exact point where sadness finally starts giving way to true understanding. You begin to realize that the event that hurt you is now behind you, but its lesson is still beautifully unfolding inside of you. At first, this reflection feels heavy. You find yourself revisiting past choices, wondering where things shifted. You think about the conversations you held on to, the hopes you built, and the raw sincerity you offered. You notice the places where you pushed yourself too hard, gave too much, or ignored your own needs just to keep a relationship balanced. These realizations can be uncomfortable, but they are completely necessary because they help you see yourself with perfect clarity. Reflection is never about blaming yourself. It is about meeting yourself. You begin to understand your own personal patterns. You see how naturally you care, how easily you trust, and how quickly your heart attaches meaning to small moments. Slowly, you understand that disappointment hurt you so deeply simply because you loved deeply, That alone is not a flaw. It is a sign of a beautiful heart that knows how to give. Yet, even a generous heart needs wisdom. Even compassion needs boundaries. This is where the believer begins to understand the concept of balance. You start realizing that your emotions also have rights. Your energy has limits. And your soul has needs that should never be neglected. When you reflect with honesty, you notice the places where you expected too much or held on to someone who was never ready to hold on to you in return. And you realize something profound. Most of our pain comes not from what actually happened, but from what we hoped would happen. Allah, in His mercy, allows these moments so the heart can realign. He teaches us how to give without losing ourselves, how to love without abandoning our own needs, and how to trust without blinding our inner wisdom. This clarity brings a quiet, unstoppable strength. You no longer view disappointment as a personal failure. You see it as divine guidance, a gentle push from Allah to adjust your path. You begin to appreciate the painful moments that forced you to pause, think, and grow. You start to see that not every person was meant to stay close, not every bond was meant to deepen, and not every promise was meant to shape your future. As this truth settles softly inside you, your heart begins to release the heavy weight it carried. You stop replaying old conversations. You stop questioning your worth. You stop measuring your value through someone else's behavior. You realize that the heart that reflects is the heart that rises. With each understanding, you grow. With each moment of clarity, you heal. With each quiet realization, you return not to the person you used to be, but to the person Allah is shaping you to become. This is the true beauty of reflection. It does not erase the past. It completely transforms it. It turns confusion into wisdom, pain into purpose, and disappointment into strength. With this new strength, the heart prepares itself for the next step, learning how to rebuild with balance, dignity, and trust in Allah alone. There comes a stage in healing where the heart begins to understand the people involved, not from a place of anger, but from a place of deep insight. You start realizing that not everyone who disappointed you actually intended to cause you harm. Some people simply cannot carry more than their own emotional weight. Some are shaped by hidden wounds you never saw. Some act purely out of fear, insecurity, or confusion. And some simply do not possess the emotional tools you hoped they had. This realization does not excuse their behavior, but it brings total clarity. It reminds you that human beings are limited. They give from the level of their own personal growth, not the level of your expectations. At this point, your heart naturally softens. You no longer look at the situation through a simple lens of good or bad. Instead, you see reality for what it is. Someone acted according to their capacity, and your heart expected more than that capacity allowed. This understanding brings a deep sense of peace, not because the pain instantly disappears, but because the confusion finally begins to fade. But understanding someone's capacity does not mean allowing them to hurt you again. This is exactly where the believer learns the quiet art of healthy boundaries. A boundary is not a wall of hatred, and it is not built on anger. It is simply a gentle, firm line that says, this is what my heart can handle and this is what it cannot. The Prophet Muhammad taught us to be kind, but also to be incredibly wise. Compassion does not mean letting people completely drain your energy. Forgiveness does not mean giving them the exact same access to your life. And gentleness does not mean sacrificing your inner peace. When you begin to set boundaries, you may feel a strange discomfort. as if you are doing something completely wrong. That is only because your heart has been so used to overgiving for so long. It has been used to constantly stretching itself too far. But with time, you realize that healthy boundaries are not a burden. They are a form of true mercy for yourself and for others. A boundary can be as simple as limiting emotional conversations with someone who cannot handle your depth. It can mean slowing down your responses, adjusting your expectations, or giving a relationship less emotional access to your life. Sometimes it simply means stepping back with grace, not bitterness, and letting Allah guide the distance. In this process, something beautiful happens. You begin to feel safe again, not because other people changed, but because you finally learned how to protect your own heart. This safety allows the heart to heal more deeply. You no longer walk into every connection blindly. You notice the signs earlier. You recognize patterns faster. You honor your limits without a single shred of guilt. And you choose relationships that align perfectly with your emotional and spiritual well-being. This is true emotional wisdom. This is spiritual maturity. This is the believer learning how to walk through life with both softness and clarity. Because the heart was never meant to harden. It was meant to awaken. As you set these boundaries gently and consistently, you discover a truth that brings immense peace. You can still be kind, still be open, and still be completely sincere while protecting the parts of you that Allah entrusted to your care. This beautiful balance between compassion and wisdom becomes the beginning of a healthier, calmer, and more grounded version of you. There comes a point in healing when the heart begins to look at the past with entirely new eyes. What once felt like a painful ending now begins to appear as a quiet beginning, a shift Allah placed on your path for reasons you could not see at the time. Disappointment in this light becomes less of a wound and much more of a teacher. Slowly, you begin to realize that certain relationships needed to loosen, not because you were unworthy, but because Allah was actively protecting you from future hurt. He removes what your heart might cling to, not to deprive you of happiness, but to guide you towards something healthier, safer, and more aligned with your ultimate destiny. Sometimes we hold on to people out of pure habit, comfort, or the fear of being alone. But Allah knows when those connections have fully served their purpose. He knows when they are quietly draining your peace, weakening your spirit, or distracting you from your true growth. And He knows exactly when it is time to redirect your heart. At this stage, you begin to notice patterns that once confused you. You understand why someone pulled away, why a conversation slowly faded, or why a bond that once felt so hopeful no longer felt the same. You begin to see that these shifts were not personal failures. They were signs. They were signs that Allah was gently removing you from what could not support your spiritual journey. This new clarity brings relief. It is not a loud relief, but a quiet kind, the kind that settles softly in your chest and whispers, Allah saved you. With this relief comes a powerful new truth. Not every absence is a loss. Some absences are a form of divine mercy. Some people leave your life so your heart can finally grow. Some doors close so better doors can open. Some disappointments shake you so that your attachments can realign from people to Allah. You also begin to understand that growth always requires space. It requires space from those who drain you, space from those who constantly misunderstand you, and space from relationships that no longer reflect who you are becoming. This space is not loneliness. It is preparation. It is Allah clearing your path for something far more meaningful, more stable, and more spiritually uplifting. Slowly, the heart begins to rise. You feel lighter because you are no longer carrying relationships that required you to shrink or compromise who you are. You feel clearer because you now see exactly why Allah placed certain endings in your life. And you feel calmer because your heart deeply trusts the wisdom in every single shift. This is the moment when acceptance starts to bloom. It is not a forced acceptance, but real acceptance. It is the kind that comes when you finally understand that Allah does not take something away unless He intends to replace it with something much better. Every delayed answer has wisdom. Every closed door has mercy. Every disappointment has purpose. And with this realization, your heart no longer looks backward with pain. It looks forward with hope. There comes a moment in the healing journey when the heart finally turns inward with softness instead of fear. After the shock, after the sadness, and after the reflections, the soul begins to realize that it also deserves kindness. This is the stage where healing truly starts, not from the outside, but from deep within. You begin to understand that carrying pain silently does not make you stronger. Being harsh with yourself does not make you wiser. Ignoring your emotions does not mean you are healed. Healing starts when you allow your heart to rest, to breathe, and to feel without shame, to acknowledge its wounds without calling itself weak. At this stage, the believer learns to speak to themselves gently, the exact way they would speak to someone they love. You start telling your heart, it's okay. You did your best. You are allowed to feel, and you are allowed to heal. This gentleness begins to change absolutely everything, because a heart that feels safe begins to open up again, not to the world, but to Allah. You realize that no matter how deeply people disappointed you, your Lord never did. He saw your tears when no one else noticed. He understood your silence when no one else cared. He carried you through moments you thought you could not survive. And now, as you heal, His closeness feels clearer than ever before. This is the stage where you begin to rebuild yourself, slowly, carefully, and deliberately. You start setting healthier limits. You start protecting your energy. You start choosing peace over chaos. You start letting go of people who cannot hold your heart with care. And you begin embracing something many people forget. Your emotional health is an amana, a sacred trust from Allah. You cannot hand that trust over to those who do not value it. You cannot neglect it just for the sake of keeping unhealthy bonds alive. You cannot sacrifice your inner peace to meet someone else's carelessness. In this stage, you also learn the gentle art of letting go, not out of anger, but out of total clarity. You practice letting go of certain expectations, letting go of the need for closure, and letting go of the desperate desire to understand everything. You let go of the version of yourself who always overextended just to hold relationships together. This letting go is not a loss, it is liberation. It makes space for who you are truly becoming. It makes space for healthier love, and it makes space for a much deeper connection with Allah. While healing does not happen overnight, you will begin to notice small, beautiful changes. Your heart will feel lighter, your thoughts will grow calmer, your nights will become quieter, and your prayers will run deeper.